Imagine looking into a mirror, tracing the line of your jaw, the shape of your eyes, the texture of your hair, and believing you know exactly where it all came from. A story passed down through generations, a story of a single people, rooted in one place since time immemorial. Now, imagine that story is not just incomplete, but wrong. Inside the cells of millions of people today lies a genetic code that contradicts the very foundation of that belief. A code that whispers of ancient migrations, forgotten meetings, and a hidden connection to a people most would never guess. We are talking about a genetic mystery that touches nearly 80 million souls. A mystery hidden within the Korean genome. A secret so profound it rewrites the prehistory of an entire peninsula. By the end of this journey, the reflection you see when you think of ancestry will never look quite the same again. This is the story of what scientists uncovered when they opened the ancient Korean genetic vault, and the surprising, hidden truth held within. It is one thing to say a population has a history. It is another to realize the genetic foundation of that history is not what anyone expected. The specific, narrow question that drives this saga is deceptively simple. Who were the ancestors of modern Koreans? Not in the historical sense, with kings and kingdoms, but in the deep, biological sense. Where did their genetic building blocks originate? The answer forms a trail of breadcrumbs leading from the frozen grounds of Siberia to the rice paddies of southern China, all converging on a single, startling claim. The Korean gene pool as we know it today is a surprisingly recent creation, and its two most critical ingredients did not originate on the peninsula. The master open loop, the one that will hang over everything you are about to hear, is this. One of the oldest and most foundational strands of Korean DNA, the deepest layer, does not tie them to mainland Asia first. It ties them, in a way that seems to defy geography, to ancient Japan. We will get there. But to do so, we must first dismantle what you thought you knew. The most persistent story is the myth of absolute purity. The idea of a single, unbroken lineage extending back to the mythical founder Dangun in 2333 BCE, a people forged in the crucible of the peninsula, untouched. This is the first false answer. The image is elegant, a clean line from a heavenly prince to a modern citizen. But genetics has no patience for elegance. The data shows a fundamental and undeniable mixed ancestry. There is no single, pristine genetic source. The internal homogeneity of modern Koreans, which is real and remarkable, is not a sign of ancient purity, but a snapshot of a blend that occurred and then became remarkably stable. The mixing happened, and then the population became a tight genetic cluster. Purity is a social story, but admixture is the biological fact. Then comes the conqueror's claim, that modern Koreans are essentially the direct descendants of the powerful Bronze Age horse riders and farmers of the northern steppe. Groups like the Proto-Mongolic or Tungusic peoples who swept across Northeast Asia. This was a favorite of older diffusionist theories, imagining a single, dramatic wave of culturally superior migrants replacing a sparse earlier population. But the genetic signal tells a different tale. While a steppe-associated component is indeed present in the Korean genome, and we will visit those warriors later, it is measurably limited. It is a garnish, not the main course. The Y chromosome lineage most often linked to a broader Northeast Asian and steppe origin, haplogroup C2, makes up only a small fraction, perhaps 10 to 15% of the Korean male lineage. It is a trace of historical contact, not a sign of demographic replacement. The vast majority of the foundational ancestry lies elsewhere. Perhaps the most interesting false answer, because it feels so intuitively correct, is the narrative of deep indigeneity from the Korean peninsula itself. The assumption is that the oldest human fossils found in Korea, from the Paleolithic, represent a direct ancestral population that simply evolved in place, adopting new technologies like pottery and farming over millennia. This is the cradle of the nation model. The problem is that ancient DNA from these early periods is extraordinarily difficult to recover, but what we can do is triangulate. The oldest recoverable genetic layer in modern Koreans, a telltale hunter-gatherer signature, does not match what we would expect from a population that was fully isolated. Instead, it connects to a very different and very specific Ice Age and early Holocene population that was spread across a vast arc, a ghost population whose most famous cultural descendants are not in Korea but in Japan. This pivotal piece of the puzzle, fragmented and unexpected, would remain hidden for decades until a new generation of technology dragged it into the light. The first real crack in the old stories came not from a flashy new excavation, but from the quiet humming of gene sequencers in a lab. The major study that began this paradigm shift was published in the journals Nature and Science Advances. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, spearheaded by an international consortium of genomicists from Seoul National University, the University of Vienna, and Harvard Medical School. Their mission was staggering in scale, to sequence and analyze the complete genomes of over 1,200 modern individuals across the Korean peninsula and Jeju Island, and then compare them to a painstakingly assembled database of ancient genomes excavated from across East Asia. This database included remains from the West Liao River Basin in Liaoning, China, the shell mounds of the Jomon culture in Japan, and Neolithic sites near the Amur River on the Russian border. The method, in plain terms, was like creating a massive puzzle box of prehistoric faces and mathematically seeing which ones best contributed pieces to the modern Korean face. For years, the core mystery remained unsolved because the internal homogeneity of the Korean genome had fooled earlier, less powerful tests into misreading it as a static population. The variation is subtle, buried deep. One lead researcher described the moment of discovery not as a eureka shout, but as a long, stunned silence in the late hours of a Vienna night, staring at a principal component analysis plot that refused to cooperate with any previous textbook model. The data was screaming something no one expected. The largest chunk of modern Korean ancestry did not originate on the peninsula. It traced its journey to the peninsula from the northwest, from a very specific, archaeologically rich place, and it brought agriculture with it. This is where the story gets truly strange, because the origin of the first Koreans is tied to a farming revolution that swept across the continent, and the first chapter of that revolution begins not in a mythical past, but in the ancient millet fields of a foreign land. The most distant and perhaps most conceptually jarring source of the modern Korean genome is a ghost. Chapter 1 is the hunter-gatherer echo, the oldest stratum of all. Imagine the prehistoric world at the end of the last ice age. The Korean peninsula is not an isolated entity but a jagged promontory connected to a vast, unglaciated landmass. The Yellow Sea is not yet a sea, it is a colossal, fertile plain. Across this landscape, from what is now Southeast Asia, through coastal China, to the heart of the Japanese archipelago, roamed populations of hunter-gatherers with a distinct genetic signature. The most famous representative of this lineage are the Jomon people of ancient Japan, a group who, remarkably, were not the primary ancestors of modern Japanese, but who left a profound and measurable genetic legacy. The surprising side fact is that the deep genetic signal detectable in modern Koreans points directly to this same Jomon-related ancestral pool. This is not a massive proportion. It is small, a subtle but stubborn whisper making up a low single-digit percentage of the total genome. But its presence is undeniable. Picture a scene from 14,000 years ago on the plain that is now the seafloor. A small band of these hunters, wrapped in deer hide, huddle by a fire at the base of a limestone cliff that today is a submerged rock, only dolphins swimming through its echoes. They are speaking a language that will vanish from the earth, their pottery, a crude cord-marked style, cluttered with fish bones. Genetically, these are not Koreans, nor are they Japanese. They are ancestors to a biocultural thread that would later be woven into both. The two-sided number is this. In some modeling, a Jomon-related ancestry comprises about 5 to 8% of the modern Korean genome, while in modern Japanese, the same layer makes up a larger but still secondary 10 to 15%. The human scale translation is that you share more genetic drift with a Jomon shell mound fisherman than you do with a Neolithic millet farmer from just a few thousand years ago in the same spot. This ancient residue is the mark of the first people to ever call the peninsula home. But their story was not to be one of continuity. The main drama was yet to arrive, and it was coming from the northwest in a wave of seeds, polished stone, and entirely new DNA. If the hunter-gatherers were the whisper, the next chapter is a shout. Chapter 2 introduces the Great Agricultural Tide, the single largest genetic component in any modern Korean. This ancestry did not bubble up from the soil. It migrated in from the West Liao River Basin, a region in what is today Liaoning Province in northeast China. The surprising side fact is just how specific this source is. Of all the ancient individuals ever sequenced across the vast landscape of China, the ones who show the strongest statistical affinity to modern Koreans are not from Shandong or the Central Plains, but from the Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures of this specific river basin, most famously represented by the Hongshan culture, with its enigmatic jade dragons and goddess temples. This was not a vague, slow drift. It was a definitive pulse of people and a transformative technology. Millet farming, and later, rice cultivation associated with the Jomon pottery period in Korea. Envision the microscene. It is a damp autumn morning around 3500 BCE in the rolling hills of the Liaoning Basin. A woman, her face marked by the fine genetic features of a Northeast Asian farmer, carefully stores foxtail millet seeds in a woven basket plastered with clay. Her community is not on the move because of a single event. They are on the move because their way of life, which supports 20 people per square kilometer in a way hunting never could, demands it. There is no map, no general, just a chain of villages slowly budding eastward and southward into new river valleys, carrying their toolkits and their genomes. The two-sided number is staggering. Autosomal analysis models consistently attribute 60 to 70%, even more in some estimates, of the modern Korean genetic makeup to this farming population from the West Liao River. The human-scale translation flips the entire national origin story on its head. For every 10 genetic ancestors you have from the prehistoric Korean peninsula, 6 or 7 of them were actually born in what is now northeast China, arriving in a wave so complete that it mostly, but not entirely, replaced the languages and lineages of the earlier hunter-gatherers. This Neolithic tidal wave is the main story, but it leaves a crucial question dangling. If the new farmers nearly replaced the old hunters, what happened to the few who remained? And that small, surviving fraction unlocks an even stranger connection we will explore next. A connection that leads away from the mainland entirely. The third chapter takes us into the genetic realm that is synonymous with male lineage and the spread of rice. The story of a farming expansion is often a story of men, and the Y chromosome carries their direct, unbroken line. The dominant Y lineage in Korean men today, making up well over half the population, is O2, formerly known as O3. This is the chapter of the Founding Fathers. The surprising side fact is not the high frequency of O2 itself, because this lineage is a star player in the peopling of all East Asia, but the specific sub-branches of O2 that dominate the Korean peninsula. They form a tight, narrow bottleneck, suggesting a powerful founder effect. In simple terms, a relatively small number of men, likely belonging to a few elite or successful clans within that original West Liao farming migration, became the direct paternal ancestors of the vast majority of modern Koreans. Their lineages exploded, while others, perhaps surviving hunter-gatherer men, left almost no Y chromosome trace at all. Imagine a settlement on the banks of the Nakdong River, around 1000 BCE, in the early Jomon pottery period. A single man, a respected elder, is buried with a polished stone dagger and a cluster of red burnished pots. He is, unknowingly, a genetic super-ancestor. His sons, and their sons, and their sons will carry variants of his same Y chromosome, spreading it through networks of marriage and alliance for the next 3,000 years, as the village grows into a town, the town into a walled city-state. The two-sided number is this. O2, in its various subclades, represents perhaps 55 to 70% of the Korean male gene pool. But minor lineages like O1b, strongly associated with the Yayoi migration that brought rice to Japan from southern China, also appear. This smaller, southern O1b signal creates a fascinating triangle, linking the Koreas, Japan, and the Yangtze River Basin through a separate, rice-tied migration of men. And then there is the final piece, the northern shadow. C2, a lineage of the steppe, is present in a small but persistent fraction, perhaps 1 in 10 Korean men. This whisper of a warrior lineage teases at the next chapter, a chapter of iron, horses, and a very different kind of arrival that would stamp the Korean genome with a final, yet subtle mark. Our fourth chapter opens with a cold wind from the north, the era of historical admixture. Long after the Neolithic fields had been sown, a new kind of genetic component appeared, carried by the mounted warriors and complex chiefdoms of Northeast Asia. This is the chapter of the steppe signal. The surprising side fact is that this admixture, while genetically measurable, is remarkably limited, leaving the deep Neolithic structure largely intact. The signal came not from a single cataclysmic invasion, as once believed, but through centuries of intermittent, layered contact with pastoralist and semi-agricultural societies to the north. The Xianbei, the Khitan, the Jurchen, and later the Mongols. These were not replacement events, they were admixture events. Think of a frontier garrison in the northern part of the peninsula during the early Three Kingdoms period, around 300 CE. A Goguryeo soldier, whose ancestors for 100 generations had been rice farmers, stands watch alongside a man of Khitan origin who has married into the community. The Khitan man's high cheekbones and his Y chromosome, from a C2-step lineage, are a novelty in the gene pool. They are not a flood, but in a closed population of 10,000 people, such small, repeated additions, a traitor here, a refugee band there, a captured clan, slowly, over 15 centuries, shift the local allele frequencies by a few percentage points. The two-sided number is precise in its smallness. Genome-wide, this West Eurasian and Siberian steppe-related admixture in Koreans is estimated to be no more than 2 to 4%, mostly on the lower end, and it is not evenly distributed. It tilts slightly toward the historical Goguryeo and Balhae regions of the north. The human-scale truth is that while the kingdoms of Korean history may have clashed with northern empires, the genetic clash was more of a gentle erosion, a faint imprint left by a handful of outsiders who over time became insiders, their DNA dissolving into the monolithic Korean whole. This tiny but crucial northern fraction is the last major addition to the recipe. And yet, in zooming out, a strange emptiness appears on the genetic map. We have the ancient hunter-gatherers, the Neolithic farmers, the rice-bearing southern men, and the northern horsemen. But there is a final glaring gap, a direction completely untouched. The deep pre-Yayoi South, a genetic bridge to the distant past that is neither farmer nor steppe nomad. The next chapter uncovers that missing link, and it will reforge the connection we first mentioned in the deepest past. A connection that points directly to the Japanese archipelago. The fifth chapter isolates a single, stunning genetic thread, a bond that predates both rice and millet, and ties Korea to the Jomon heartland. We have talked about the ancient hunter-gatherer echo in low percentages, but here, the side fact is its legacy in a specific lineage. The haplogroup D1b, a rare but deeply ancient branch of the human Y chromosome tree, is found in modern populations almost exclusively in very specific places. In high frequencies among the Ainu of Hokkaido, in lower frequencies among the people of the Japanese archipelago, faint traces in the Andaman Islands, and, critically, in a small but reliably detectable fraction among Koreans. This is not a farmer lineage, it is a hunter-gatherer lineage, a direct biological thread from the Paleolithic Jomon-related population. The microscene is a geneticist's computer screen in Seoul. A postdoc is tracing the phylogeny of D1b samples, her finger moving from a sequence sent from a man in Busan across the map of time. She does not move it west, to China. She moves it east, to the ancient Jomon shell mounds of Honshu. The common ancestor of the Busan man's lineage and a Jomon skeleton's lineage lived 20,000 years ago, somewhere on the lost coastal plains of the Ice Age, before the sea rose and divided them into Koreans and Japanese. The two-sided number is a study in rarity. This direct Jomon-associated D1b lineage appears in perhaps 3 to 5% of modern Korean men, a tiny fraction, but one that definitively proves descent from the pre-farming indigenous population. The farmers from the northwest, for all their demographic might, could not erase this last stubborn paternal thread. It survived, like a lone pine on a mountainside, all the way to the 21st century. This genetic line offers irrefutable proof that before the Koreans were a distinct Iron Age kingdom, before the Mumun pottery culture, before any millet was ever planted, a part of their ancestry called ancient Japan, or at least its Ice Age predecessor, the same place they later helped populate. That strange mirroring, two waves separated by 10 millennia, is a profound reframing of East Asian deep history. Yet all of this, the farmers, the Jomon, the northern riders, is still a list of ingredients. The final chapter must show how this specific mixture happened, and the tool that lets us see the final surprising detail is not a recounting of who, but a mathematical method of when. The last chapter reveals the chronology of mixture, and it is the final surprising piece. The question is not just what the mixture was, but when it locked into place to become the modern Korean gene pool. The surprising side fact, derived from linkage disequilibrium decay on thousands of genomes, is that the main admixture event between the northern farming wave and the southern Jomon-related layer was not a single, ancient event. It happened in a relatively compressed window of time, roughly between 3500 and 1500 BCE. The microscene is a series of maps, each showing a date like a frame of an animation. At 5000 BCE, dots of Jomon-related hunter-gatherers are scattered across the Korean peninsula. By 3000 BCE, huge, dense arrows are moving in from the West Liao Basin, filling the northwest of the peninsula. By 2000 BCE, the entire peninsula is a patchwork of interacting cells, farmer and hunter, and by 1000 BCE, the patchwork has vanished, replaced by a single, fused, uniform color. The two-sided number is the timing. This means the core genetic formation of the Korean people was not a process unfolding continuously for 50,000 years in isolation. It was largely finished 3,500 years ago. The takeaway is simple. The Korean genome is a specific, discernible, and relatively youthful blend. It is a recipe with a date stamp. The agriculturalists from the West Liao River absorbed the indigenous hunter-gatherers, and this newly fused population, sealed off on the peninsula, underwent a homogenizing process for millennia, creating the tight genetic cluster we see today. But even as this final clock ticks into place, pointing to a finished blend, one question becomes ever more urgent. If the recipe was set 3,500 years ago, what was the one final ingredient that disappeared? An ingredient so alien to modern Korea that its very existence in the deep past seems like a paradox. We will find it where this entire journey started, in the most impossible of places. The narrowing. All the threads pull tight. We have a major wave of northeast Chinese farmers, and a minor, much older layer of Jomon-related hunter-gatherers. The evidence is not a single chromosome or a single skull. It is a convergence of autosomal DNA models, Y chromosome phylogenies, and admixture timing estimates. The data from the West Liao River Basin points northwest. The D1b lineage points east. There is only one way to reconcile these two vectors. The modern Korean genome is a frozen snapshot of a continent-spanning collision that happened on a single peninsula, with one wave coming from the interior of Asia and the other, the older ghost, being the drowned echo of a lost coastal world that once connected Korea to the Japanese archipelago. Take a breath. The answer clicks into place. The core answer. The deepest genetic secret of modern Koreans is this. The largest component of their ancestry did, in fact, arrive from the northwest, from the West Liao River Basin, bringing millet agriculture and a new language. But the oldest, most indigenous component, the foundation on which that new identity was built, does not genetically disconnect them from Japan. It genetically connects them. It is a Jomon-related ancestry. The Korean gene pool is not the story of a people who were always purely and separately Korean. It is the story of an ancient, pan-Northeast Asian hunter-gatherer substrate, heavily overprinted by a massive, later farming migration from a region that is today part of China. That is the answer promised at the start. And here is the twist, the thing that rips the map and redraws it. The reframing is this. The nation-building myth of singular descent from a mythic founder on the peninsula is a story of biological replacement disguised as continuity. The nation that existed in the Paleolithic was not Korean in any genetic sense. It was a distant sister group to the Jomon. The Korean genome as we know it is a Neolithic invention, a colonial product born when farmers from the West Liao River Valley, moving into new lands, largely but incompletely absorbed the native hunter-gatherers. The largest genetic signal in a modern Korean points not to Mount Paektu, but to the Neolithic miracle city of New-Heliang in Liaoning, with its stone altars and jade-working masters. The genetic twist is that the indigenous, peninsular origin story is simultaneously true and false. It is true that a deep, autochthonous ancestry exists. It is false that this ancestry is the primary one, or that it was Korean in the way we use the word today. The real story is one of a demographic wave of such force that it became the defining biological identity, a wave that began outside the borders of the modern nation-state. This reframes not just who Koreans are, but how we envision the formation of any homogeneous-seeming nation. The genetic foundation is not an ancient, unbroken monolith. It is a scar, a healed wound from a prehistoric collision between a small native population and a vast incoming tide, and the language and identity of the newcomers completely dominated. The ghost in the machine is the Jomon echo, a reminder of the people who were there first. But does any other evidence converge on this same surprising conclusion? Independent confirmation comes not from genes, but from language and archaeology. The independent confirmation chapter is the story of the language isolate. Linguists have long puzzled over the Korean language, which is not clearly related to Chinese, and sits uncomfortably in the hypothetical Altaic family. The farming wave theory provides a clean model. The Neolithic millet farmers from the West Liao River likely carried a Proto-Koreanic language with them, a tongue that would have, over time, displaced the unknown Paleo-Siberian-like language of the Jomon-related hunter-gatherers. The archaeology matches perfectly. The arrival of the Mumun pottery period, with its rice and millet farming, marks a sharp, total cultural break from the previous Jomon pottery period of the peninsula. The pottery styles, settlement patterns, and toolkits of the Mumun do not evolve from the Jomon. They arrive as a fully formed package from the north. The skeletal morphology shifts as well. Forensic anthropologists, comparing Jomon skeletal remains to those from the Mumun period, note a discernible change in cranial features, dental traits, and stature. A biological signal of a population movement, not just a cultural one. This is the convergence. A new language, a new material culture, a new skeletal morphology, and a new dominant genetic component, all pointing to the same event and the same place of origin. The mystery is not a mystery at all. It is a multi-layered, multidisciplinary consensus that the genetic data has merely rendered in the highest possible resolution. The mechanism deep dive. The how is not just about migration, but about specific genetic systems and hard comparative numbers, both sides stated plainly. On one side, the Jomon-related component, its legacy is visible in traits like certain variants related to earwax type and tooth morphology. The dry earwax allele and the shovel-shaped incisors, classically East Asian traits with very high frequencies in modern Koreans, have their own evolutionary history, tracing back in part to these ancient hunter-gatherer populations. On the other side, the West Liao River farming component brought a genetic profile adapted to a starch-heavy diet. Specific amylase gene copy number variations, AMY1, which help digest starch, show a distinct pattern consistent with populations that have a long history of farming. Comparative numbers are stark. The modern Korean AMY1 copy number profile aligns not with Jomon hunter-gatherer proxies, whose copies would have been low, but with the Neolithic Chinese farmers whose remains have been sequenced and show high copy numbers. For skin pigmentation, the story is the same. The penetration of lighter skin-associated alleles, variants of the OCA2 and SLC24A5 genes, follows the path of the agriculturalists from the higher latitude West Liao Basin, layered over the darker pigmentation-associated variants present in the earlier Jomon-related stratum. Both sides of the ancestry are literally visible. The hunter-gatherer legacy is in the robustness of the skeleton and certain deep-rooted dental patterns. The farmer legacy is in the metabolic machinery for processing grains, and the pigmentation genes that shifted under selective pressure at higher latitudes. The modern Korean is a biological fusion of a high-starch digestive system and an ancient dental template, a body that tells two stories at once. An honest limit must be stated plainly. What the evidence does not prove is that every modern Korean is an exact, uniform mixture of these components. Nor can it be used to support any modern racial or political ideology about Korean identity. The admixture percentages are approximate ranges. Depending on the reference populations and the statistical models used, the Jomon-related component can shift from 5 to 10%, and the West Liao River farming component from 60 to 75%. These are not fixed, immutable numbers. They are the best estimates from current data. Furthermore, this model does not erase the profound, millennia-long cultural and biological evolution that has occurred on the Korean peninsula itself. The Korean people are not simply a mix of old ingredients. They have undergone their own unique selective sweeps, their own demographic expansions, and their own genetic drift that makes them a distinct population. The admixture model describes the base of the cake, not the intricate icing applied over 3,000 years of continuous, isolated history. The evidence proves a deep, complex origin story of convergence, not a simple, pure descent. Now, bring it down to the everyday. This is not an abstract story of ancient farmers and Jomon hunters. This is the story inside your own face, in your own name, in your own blood. If your family is Korean, the high copy number of amylase genes, a direct legacy of the millet farmers of Liaoning, is the reason a bowl of rice feels like home to your body. The subtle, persistent shape of your jaw and teeth, an ancient echo, is the last physical signature of the hunter-gatherers who walked the frozen plains of the lost Yellow Sea coast 20,000 autumns ago. You carry their extinction-level event and their fusion in every cell. You are the hunter-gatherer who was not erased, and you are the farmer who made a new world. A repetition run to bring it home. You are the West Liao River, and you are the Jomon shell mound. You are the Jade Dragon, and you are the cord-marked pot. The final line echoes the title. The surprising secret held within ancient Korean genes was never a secret at all, but a memory, a story of two vanished worlds colliding to make something entirely new. A story that reframes not just a single peninsula's past, but the very nature of what it means to be a people. So, here is the comment bait. Which of these two ancient ancestries do you think has a more visible legacy in your own family? The hunter-gatherer resilience or the farmer's transformative drive? Let me know why in the comments below.